Yeah, and the part that I'm holy that scared the out of me.
What happened?
So I like swiped my fingers and it went back to the home page. So I was like, "Oh my god, did we just lose all this footage?"
Nope, I was still on here.
No, but thank God. Oh my god, I was about to a brick.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a cinematic odyssey through the 100 greatest films spanning from the roaring 1920s to the cutting-edge masterpieces of 2024. Carefully curated from the lovely people on Letterboxd. Two intrepid souls embark on a journey through a treasure trove of timeless classics and groundbreaking contemporary works, where each frame embodies the enduring magic of the silver screen. Grab your popcorn and join us on this epic expedition through a century of cinematic excellence, where every film promises to enchant, inspire, and leave an indelible mark on the soul. And now, for your listening pleasure, here are the LetterBros.
I shouldn't have had gin before this recording. Welcome, everybody, to the 5th episode of LetterBros, where we let a wheel decide our fate and what movie we watch next. My name is Felix, and as always, I'm joined by my friend Parker. How are we doing today, buddy? You feel a little giggly over there.
How can I not? It took us like 6 tries to hop into the intro. This is some funny stuff.
It's great stuff. You know what wasn't funny? This movie.
You can always find some comedy in the sadness.
You could, but it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack in this movie. This was something. But I'm gonna, before we dive further deep into it, if you watched last episode, we spun the wheel and we landed on the 2011 Iranian film, A Separation.
Yes, so this is a movie that neither of us had heard about before drawing it from the wheel. But A Separation, as you mentioned, is an Iranian drama film from 2011 directed by, wait for it, Asghar Farhadi. It is a critically acclaimed film. It won Best International Feature Film at the Oscars the year that it came out. And it was also nominated for Best Original Screenplay, which we'll dive into that a little bit later. But the screenplay really is phenomenal. But it dives into the intricate dynamics between a couple that is going through a divorce for reasons that we'll get into, and some subsequent legal drama that follows as they hire a full-time caregiver for our protagonist, I guess you could say, for his aging father who has
Alzheimer's.
So there are a lot of personal relationships that are tested in this movie. There's a lot of interesting Iranian legal drama that is very different from the U.S. court system. We'll get into that. But for good reason, found itself on the Letterboxd top 100 list. Had powerful performances and a really good portrayal of just some almost everyday like kind of social issues that people could face out of the blue. This movie really shows like just the turns that life can take. But just a disclaimer, because we had talked about it before we started recording. This film did come out in 2011, so on the grand scale of things, it is relatively new. I mean, it's still been over, oh my god.
It's the jump scare.
It's still been over 10 years since this movie came out. So, like it's been out for a while, but still we do want to issue a spoiler warning, of course, as always, because we're just going to dive right into a lot of the plot details, a lot of the character decisions, things that happen, questions that we have, and kind of just all about what goes down. So this movie was pitched to us by its synopsis online as a drama about a separating couple because the mother wants to move out of Iran and the father wants to stay at home and take care of his father because his father would not be able to leave Iran with them. And they both have a daughter. And that's what I thought we were going to get into, was just like the family drama, specifically the family drama. But really, the film is not primarily about that. I would argue that the main plot follows in-home caregiver that the father, who is named Nader, I believe is how it's pronounced.
Nader,
Nader. The father, he hires an in-home caregiver to take care of his demented father, his father who has dementia.
He has Alzheimer's.
Yeah. And and she's pregnant, and she also is a pretty shitty caregiver. Like she completely abandons Nadir's father at a moment in time. And so we kind of follow the rabbit hole there. Obviously, some frustrations arise, and there's a conflict between some missing money and some accusations. And then we kind of follow that legal drama. So I would say, pleasantly surprised that there was an additional plot to this. It definitely wasn't like the divorce family drama that I thought it was going to be. It still was, but not to the same degree. But you mentioned you found the beginning of the film boring. So did it pick up for you eventually, or how did you feel?
Oh yeah. So like when I started the movie, and obviously with like the synopsis of it, I thought we were gonna get like an Iranian marriage story.
Yeah, that's what I
Um
thought at first too.
yeah, like obviously for those that don't know, Marriage Story, it's pretty much also a divorce movie, starring Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver, which amazing movie. I love it. Like, and the performances in there are great. I just thought that this is what we were going to be doing, and I also have never heard the Persian language before. Like, it's not something I've really like sought to listen to, and it's very jarring when it starts. I feel because like a lot of the cadences in their tone of speech are very dry and just like it's like
And they
there's
speak
no
quickly. The subtitles moved
correct.
quite fast.
There were even points where like because I watched at least you watched it on Prime or did
Yeah,
you
I
rent
watched it on
it?
Prime.
Okay, so did I. There were points where like they were talking so fast that like you said the subtitles would just like miss what's going on.
Hmm.
Which like not to a point where
And
like I
also
didn't
who was
understand what was going
speaking.
on.
At
Hmm?
times, I couldn't tell which subtitle belonged to which individual.
Yeah.
So there were definitely some difficulties there, and that's no fault of the film,
And
obviously.
I think that that's what was predominantly the beginning of this film. And again, there's a lot of just like character building and just like building the situation around it, but it's like it doesn't like it's not like obviously it's not like telling you exactly like who is who. Like you're just kind of having to like just watch and see what happens. But to your point, when this movie picks up, it picks up hard,
Hmm.
and it just like it's just ever escalating, which is why, to Parker's point, I think people should go into this movie pretty blind, like we did, because I really didn't know what to expect. Like, I was very confused with. I think it was on Letterboxd or I saw it somewhere where this movie was described for the genre as a thriller slash mystery.
Hmm.
So I'm watching this and I'm like, but this is a movie about a separation. Like, what's going to be the mystery? And I guess the mystery is who caused this lady to have a miscarriage.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many mysteries, so to speak, that take place
Yeah.
throughout the film, and I also think that the title of the film, "A Separation," is so applicable to everybody in this film. Now, don't get me wrong. I am kind of generalizing a bit because the proper title of the name is A Separation of Nader and Simin. Like that is the full
Yeah.
name of the film. So
Literally a separation of the two main characters of the movie.
exactly. So obviously the film primarily is about the separation of mother and father, right? But there are so many separations kind of that take place throughout the film. There becomes a sort of rift between Nader and Simin and their daughter,
Mm-hmm.
Terma, who has separation, kind of rifts between both of her parents because of everything that is happening. There's
Mm-hmm.
also a sort of separation that is going on between what was the name of the caregiver?
Razier. Razier. It's Razieh.
Razier. So there's a separation between her and her husband that we'll dive into, between her and
Hojat.
Nader. I mean, I really appreciated the fact that this movie was written to the point where each character has their own personal conflict, which with
Mm-hmm.
every other character. I
Yeah.
did a horrible job of explaining that, but they all have their own relationships with one another. So depending on who's occupying the screen, there's a completely different context that's taking place. And I
Yeah,
really
everybody is
appreciate the
going
way
through
that
their own
was
like
written.
serious issues in
Hmm.
this movie. And they're like it's not like they're kind of hidden, like they're all pretty much like face forward, like like what each of them is going is pretty much going through in this movie. But he does such a good job of blending all of that together, while not making it seem like it's overbearing or just kind of overcluttered. Like it's a movie about tragedy, but it's blended very beautifully.
So I will say in the beginning of the film, where we're currently at in the plot, where how did you pronounce her name? I have Rana as her name. That's not correct, right?
Who, the caretaker?
Yes.
The caretaker. Oh, I will get that.
But while you're pulling that up, whenever the caregiver was in the home and the caregiver's daughter was there, like playing with the father's oxygen and just doing all this crazy stuff, and the caregiver really wasn't paying any attention. There were a lot of points where I'm
No,
like, oh
she's
my gosh,
terrible at her job.
yes, like some of the character choices in the beginning to get us to the point of conflicts are definitely frustrating to watch. Where I'm just like, these people are so self-absorbed, especially the mother too. There were some scenes with the mom where I was literally like angry at the choices that she was making, thinking like, you clearly like are in the wrong here. But I think by the end of the movie, the film does kind of balance out, and it does a good job of kind of at least giving you motivation as to why someone would act in such a aggressive or such a self-consumed manner, and how they're actually thinking, how they're perceiving the situation. And similarly, I really thought that Nader was like the clear protagonist of the film. But as the movie continued, you start to see that he's also quite flawed. And, he also has made some questionable decisions. So there's really no true protagonist of this film. Maybe Terma, the daughter, because she's the only one where, she's really just watching it unfold. But
I really think that she is the vehicle for this movie. I think that she is supposed to be like our eyes into what's going on, because again, like, we are watching this movie through the lens of Terme, because throughout the separation, like, she thinks obviously her mom is in the wrong. She'd rather live with her dad because she sees her dad kind of like the protagonist, like he is not doing anything wrong. Like, we do see that go on as, like, as the legal troubles begin and we start to unravel like what Nadir was thinking and what was true and what was a lie, and we start to see her kind of unfold and break down, and truly grow through this movie to where, we get to, and I'm sorry to like jump to the end where, she now has to choose between who she's going to be living with, and the choice is up to her, where in the beginning of the movie we would have thought she clearly wants to go and stay with her father, but then we're left undecided. Like, we don't know who she chose. So it's just, I thought that was a really nice story arc that we got like through Terme, because she is the audience. She is everything. Like, I literally was feeling the same thing. I'm like, obviously Nadir is in the right, like he didn't do anything wrong, but then as stuff seems to unfold, I also started rewinding the movie, because there's points where it's like something gets brought up that happened earlier that I've missed out, and I'm like, did that really happen? And it did, but it just fell under the radar, because at that point you already have
everyday life. I mean, the movie does such a good job of just being the everyday flow of life, and really like settling the story into the context of people just living their lives. Now, like, we don't follow them outside of the conflicts. Like, the movie does do a good job of staying on task, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
But still, sorry to interrupt, but the flow of the movie was so aggressively real. Like, it was very good
like,
job.
Even just like bringing it back to what I was saying earlier, just like the cadences in people's voice, like when Nadir goes to trial, which I thought these trial scenes were so weird, but I guess I'm assuming that that's how it's done in Iran, where it's literally just a crowded room. You have your judge. There's people already behind you, I guess, like in line to speak to the judge next. Like, it's very chaotic. But the first time you hear about that and he's thinking like he's going to be ready to leave, the judge goes, well, no, you're being charged for murder. We have to keep you in jail. And you'd think that like the movie and theatrics part of your brain would have him like kind of go ballistic and go like, no, like, who's going to take care of my dad? What's going to happen? But like, he always keeps just such a mellow tone. He's all consistently calm, and it feels like that would happen in real life. Like a normal person wouldn't just go screaming his head off, much like Hojiat did throughout pretty much the entire movie. But like
Yes and no.
Nadir, I mean, there's some,
We've
but
seen
that's
it.
the thing. That's the thing. Like this movie saves its outbursts for when it feels necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm sorry I keep jumping around, but like towards the end where, Simin tells Nadir that like, look, just pay the money. We've already talked to Hojia. Like he's agreed to drop the blood money down and he's refusing. And that's when they start getting escalated. Or that's one of them. The main one being when he's trying to kick Razier out of his house, which starts the whole chain of events in the movie. But again, he saves that for when it's necessary, and it just grounds the movie that much more in reality.
Yes, so there's a couple of points of contention that we follow throughout the film. So of course, as you mentioned, when Nader comes back and finds that his father was tied to the bed, he is panicking, and his caregiver comes back home as he's continuing to panic. And not only was his father tied to the bed, but there's some money missing from his drawer. And obviously, he conflates the two in his state of panic, and he forces Razier out of the apartment. And we don't see what happens. She kind of, she's pushed out the door hastily, essentially. But there's no outright physical assault, I would say, that like takes place that we see on screen.
Mm-mm. It's not anything over the top. Like
correct. It's just
something
for both parties to have plausible deniability, which
correct.
allows the rest of the plot to sustain itself. Because as the viewer, both sides could be true. You can make an argument for both sides. The other point of contention among many is the missing money that we follow throughout the film. And it is something that happens so quickly when Simin comes home and pays movers that are just taking her couch up the stairs. And it happens so quickly in the beginning of the film, and it's never really even brought up again.
Was that where the money went?
Yep, because exactly. Because she had paid the movers to go up the extra. Do you remember in the beginning?
Yeah, because they said 2 floors. This is 3, like counting like
and
the ground floor, the first floor, and the second.
It's such a nothing scene. Like that scene, other than her saying, I'll pay you for the 3rd floor, fine. I mean, other than that, there's, it's just her going about her day. And that's how it feels. So
I was literally just about to ask you, do you even know where that money went? Because again, that wasn't even a scene that I thought about rewinding to see where the money went, because I thought it was just like an unresolved issue that I'm thinking at the end of the movie, I'm like, okay, like obviously we got through like the bigger picture of like the miscarriage, but like where did the money go? He made such a big deal about it, but like that's insane.
Yeah, and leads into more of the legal drama too, because now he's pressing charges against her for leaving his father unattended, and all the while the caregiver's husband is a jobless maniac, basically. So it is an important distinction here that Nader's family is middle class, upper middle class, and the caregiver comes from she and her husband are from a poorer background, and her husband has these anger issues, and he's throughout the movie kind of the opposite of Nader, handling everything with aggression and with anger and without a clear conscience.
Like even headbutting him in a hospital.
Exactly. And showing up at Nader's daughter's school, at Terme's school, to harass the witness. So there's so much that happens in this movie that it's kind of difficult to talk about in this kind of format, because without bouncing around, right? Because there's so much that happens that pertains to something that had just happened again. And I think that it would hold up on a second watch, definitely.
Oh yeah, I think there is definite rewatchability in this movie just to go back.
Missed.
Exactly.
So let's move into the third act of the film, where it comes to light that where the caregiver had gone at one point in the film was to pick up Nader's dad, who had wandered off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So already, again, she's not paying attention. Okay, This is the reason she had tied him up, was because he had already escaped. So she's not a good
Correct.
caregiver. Like, let's just
No.
continue to stress that. Not a good caregiver. Grandpa
Yeah.
gets out in the street.
And she was a recommendation from a friend of Simin. So Razier's sister-in-law was the one that recommended to Simin that she should be this caregiver to kind of be able to nudge Nadir in the right direction. Because, I mean, just to kind of pinpoint on just like why they're separating, to like what you said, the like, she wants to move out of the country with her daughter and take her, like she wants the whole family to uproot themselves and leave. So she sees Razier as this opportunity to be able to have someone to take care of his dad and not have him worry about it, so they could uproot themselves and leave, without really, kind of going deeper into her qualifications. She's just trying to see maybe like a quick way out of this to be able to just pack up and leave. But
Well, and also, the Simin was the primary caregiver. Okay. So Nadir had to find someone quickly because Simin went to live with her parents. So he had to hire quickly. But what I was mentioning is what comes to light is I keep pronouncing her name incorrectly, so I'm referring to her as the caregiver. She has a guilty conscience because something we haven't mentioned yet, there's a lot of religion in this movie, and a lot of the characters make their decisions based off whether or not it would be perceived as a sin. And there's
specifically the caretaker.
So she's having a very guilty conscience because she's not 100% sure that Nadir pushing her out the door caused her miscarriage. In fact, where she was the doctor's office to see if she had already had a miscarriage prior to Nadir even pushing her. Because the first time that the grandfather had gotten out, she states she was hit by a car when trying to bring him back inside.
Which wasn't shown in the movie at all. Like, I don't, or at least I don't remember. I might have to rewatch it again. But
and it's never proven. To be fair, it's never proven.
Yeah.
This is, again, just a claim. There's also something that is brought up by a teacher at Terme's school when she's testifying in court. She asks the caregiver's daughter, did your daddy cause this? Did your daddy and mommy get into a fight? And did he hit her, causing her to have a miscarriage? So that is popped into your head. And none of these are ever proven. The movie does wrap up without anyone getting a full, firm answer as to why the miscarriage occurred. And I'm glad for that, because I think that that's the most realistic outcome.
Correct.
But she has a guilty conscience when she's receiving a settlement at the end of the movie from Nadir. And she brings this up to her husband, and I found the scene to be a little bit comical, the way that it kind of played out, but he gets outraged with her and storms off and reacted exactly how she knew he would. So there are a lot of loose ends that aren't neatly tied up. But that's okay, because the movie gives enough support to every possibility for it to be realistic. So
exactly.
I'm not sure if I articulated my thoughts there like adequately, but
no, you did. I mean, this is a complicated situation that outside of Hollywood doesn't really need like a definitive resolution. Like, there's always in terms of like these matters, like there's not always going to be like a definitive, like factual answer to what happened. Like, could it have been the push? Yes. Could it have been her getting hit by a car? We won't know, but we can only base our answers on the biggest flex that I saw in this movie was when, Nadir and his family, they go to the caretaker's home. They all are there together to like set the settlement. He literally writes the checks in front of them and says, before I give these to you, swear on the Quran that I was the man that caused your miscarriage. And that's where it connects to what Parker was saying, is that, the caretaker and her husband go into the kitchen, and she's again having doubts. So like, because she also has a child. She has like I want to say she's like maybe 6.
A very young daughter. Yeah.
Yeah. A very young daughter who she is thinking about, because again, she's very religious and she doesn't want to swear on the Quran because she believes that it will cause bad things to start happening to her daughter. But the husband is more concerned about money, even though he never really wants to admit it.
because he's in so
But
much
he
debt
is.
too. All of his creditors
Correct.
are there.
So it's also mentioned in the movie that like he had a steady job and was let go. He was a cobbler for many, many years, but was let go from that job and I guess never just found anything after that. But he's just trying to find the quickest way because obviously he's still upset that, you know, his unborn child was killed by what we'll never know, but he's still feeling the anguish and the anger from that, but also wanting to find this monetary solution that would probably help him get over it and help his family in the long run. But she
Mhm.
puts her faith in religion and wants to, you know, keep her daughter safe, causing him to obviously go outrageous and start slapping the crap out of himself.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
again, it's to your point, this is the type of movie that doesn't need a definitive resolution because that's just how life is most of the time. Like I'm kind of glad that the movie just kind of ends with them literally sitting separate from each other. It's such a
mhm.
good shot
It's a
with
great
the
shot.
credits with the credits just rolling. You let that shot roll on and we never see Terme come out with a decision, but she keeps just saying like I've made one. I've made a decision. I have a decision, but we never know what it is. Who do you think she went with?
Would feel like it's pointless to even predict, if I'm being honest.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, it was left ambiguous. It was meant to be both and neither at the same time.
It's fair. I mean, because both of them did have their flaws. Like she blames her mom for like kind of causing all of this.
I
That's
will say there was definitely a scene in which her mom got really, really like mad and nasty with her for not agreeing.
yeah.
Basically.
When
And
she's
at
trying to like get her to leave the apartment with her.
yes,
Yeah.
and at that moment, I definitely saw a difference between mother and father here, with mom really
Mhm.
just wanting to be in control. And
Nadir is very much just like cool center, like grounded in
yes,
reality, but that
very
comes with
grounded.
he's very grounded, but it comes with a fault. Like he wants to protect his family. Like he's all about making sure that his dad is kept safe and alive and making sure that his daughter has a good education. He's always tutoring her and making sure that she's doing well in school, but is willing to do whatever's necessary with even including lying to a judge and making not like making Tamir, but it's kind of implied that he tries to like make her lie to the judge as well to be able to keep that family dynamic together with or without Simon.
So I'm guessing that you think that she chose to go with her father.
I feel like at the end of the day, she might have, but again, that's what you would have thought the answer was at the beginning of the movie if this question was brought up, because again, like she sees her father in this big light. He can do no wrong. He's just trying to keep the family together while Simon is, you know, trying to break the family apart and doing whatever. Like she continues to choose her father to the point where she goes up to a judge. Like he never
Well,
like
that
when the
could be
judge
argued.
asks her so
I think that could be
when the
argued.
judge asks to see Tamir, Tamir goes up to her dad and she says, well, what kind of questions does he want me to say? He knows full well what he's going to ask her, but he still says, I don't know, just go in there, which then sets it up for the judge to be like, did he tell you what questions I was going to ask? And she says, no, which is true, but she knows in the back of her mind that there's some sort of lie with him not knowing. There's another like kind of lie that's going around that's pretty pivotal to the plot, and I feel like connects to what you were saying, like with Iranian law, is if Nadir knew that she was pregnant or not when he pushed her, because he even mentions it like there's no sense of like backstory. It's either yes or no,
Mhm.
and if it's a yes, I'm going to jail.
Yeah, there's a lot of all I can really do like right now is just recommend for people to go watch the film, because there are so many different thoughts that run through your head when you're watching it, because there's so much that is happening so quickly in
Hmm.
such a slow way. Like it's not like action packed, I wouldn't say, or anything.
No,
It's
it's
just
it's definitely not.
there's a lot to
It
follow. You definitely
it
feel like
relies very heavily on the screenplay and the performances of everyone in this movie, for sure.
so
Like, it is the driving force of this movie.
So I think the best way to continue talking about what we did like and didn't like would be to just hop right into our rankings. That way we can kind of categorize
I
our
think so
thoughts
too,
a little bit
because
better.
we can just keep going round and round with what's going on in this movie,
Mhm.
and there's so many like little branches that come
Well,
out of it.
I want to hear before we dive into our specific rankings, like what would your review like? Just give me like a brief review of what you thought of the movie.
At first, like when I finished watching it, I didn't think that I would need to watch this movie again. But talking about it now, especially with you unlocking my brain about just the little scenes in the movie that create such a snowball effect in later portions of the movie, makes you like kind of have to rewatch this movie and watch out for stuff in the beginning, because like what I said earlier, I'm like the beginning of the movie was kind of boring. There wasn't really anything like it did not catch my attention until we saw Nadir's father on the floor tied up to the bed. That's when I was like, all right, let's pay attention to this movie. To your point, like the pivotal like maybe 20 minutes of the film sets up so much for later on in the film. But I
So
want to know what you think.
overall positive
I would
thoughts.
say so, yeah.
Yeah,
And
for me,
you?
I think my final thoughts would be that this was a great slice of life movie with higher stakes than most slice of life movies. So I
Hmm.
really respect it for that. I can't remember if I mentioned in the intro that this movie was made for $800,000 and brought
You
in
didn't.
and it brought in 24 million. Um, so just I really can appreciate the feats that were overcome in order to create this film and have it be so sharp and so dense in a good way, so
Yeah.
rich and dense and filled with dialogue that actually means something,
Mhm.
even if it is said in passing. So I have a lot of respect for the movie. It's rewatchable, but not in a fun way, and we're gonna dive
No.
into that now. Um, but yeah, overall, I would say positive thoughts too. I think that this is my second favorite movie that we've watched so far, behind Fanny and Alexander.
So I think it's gonna play into our rankings
Yeah, so let's
very
dive in.
smoothly. So for enjoyability and rewatchability, I gave it an 11 out of 15, mainly because like this movie, it's well, like you said, it's not a difficult watch, but it's also not fun to watch at the same time, but it almost requires a second viewing just to catch those little moments that snowball later on in the film. So I would say mainly that rewatchability factor is what pushes my score up, because to your point, like this wasn't the most like fun movie. It deals with some very heavy topics for sure, but it keeps it engaging and keeps you thinking and keeps the mystery alive that like a second watch might answer some of those questions that you
Mhm.
had. So what did you
Yeah.
think?
So for enjoyability and rewatchability, I give it a 9, which may seem low, but I can't see myself revisiting it past a second time because, like we mentioned, the rewatchability factor comes from wanting to go and pick up on things. However, there's a difference between that and a movie that's rewatchable because I want to just put it on and have a great time watching it because it's something that I really love.
That's
Um,
fair.
so I think that it was an enjoyable one-time watch. I don't think I would necessarily enjoy it as much a second time, but I do think it would be worth it. And then past that, I don't think I would really revisit it, at least not for a little while. Um,
Yeah.
but let's dive
So
into the
you can
story.
go. Yeah, go ahead.
It told an incredible story, and it had a phenomenal screenplay, and it was so intricate in terms of the realism and the dynamics between all the characters. I am putting up a high 13 for story for this film. I
Okay.
think it really was well done, well crafted.
I also gave it a 13 for pretty
Nice.
much the same reasons that, this story, while there was like a main focus to the story, there were other things that kept it engaging and just kept you thinking, like, what is going to happen next? And it's executed so well that it doesn't feel like there's too, like, you're munching on too much. Like, it's a lot, but it's enough. I would say lasting impression in terms of like And that's always such a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah,
because
there's
I'm
so many
never
ways
really
to
sure, like,
that category.
it's always interesting because it's like it's a point that you made last episode that, obviously, like, it's impressed on you in this moment because you just watched the movie not too long ago. Like, I watched this movie yesterday. So obviously it's still fresh in my mind.
Maybe every like 10 episodes or so, we can start going one back and adjusting our lasting impression score, possibly.
Mhm.
Just something to keep in mind. Because obviously there's no definite list in the world. Like people's opinions change every single day. So what we're doing here is more of a rough estimate based off like our immediate reactions for the most part. So I
Yeah.
get what you mean. I like I said last episode, it's usually this category for me is usually a prediction. How much do I think this is going to have a carrying emotional impact on me, or how long is this going to be having an intellectual impact on me? So I want to leave either feeling emotionally changed or intellectually challenged,
Mhm.
in order for me to score high. In
Which
this
I think the latter is what tickled more of my brain in. It was like the intellectual, like the crafting and storytelling of this movie was what left the biggest impression, which is why I would give it a 9.
Mhm.
Along obviously with like the performances because everybody played their parts very well and were very grounded. It never made me think like I was watching, kind of weird to say, though, like, I felt almost like I was watching, like, some sort of documentary, that we were just kind of like a
Mhm.
fly on the wall of, like, what was going on in this family's life.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll dive into that in visual appeal as well because
Correct.
the cinematography was very documentary-esque. Like, this movie is not a mockumentary. It doesn't try to be a documentary of any sort, but it's shot handheld for a lot of the time. There's a lot of lingering shots that happen, and we'll dive into it. Let me talk about the
Yeah.
lasting impression.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm fluctuating right now in my mind between a 9 and a 10 because contrary to your takeaways, I felt emotionally impacted by this movie in the sense that I really felt that I walked away with this movie thinking or from this movie thinking no matter how absurd or aggressive or egregious like other people's actions and decisions may seem, they almost always have what in their mind is a justified reason for acting
Mhm.
that way. And I think this movie did a really, really good job of showing that. And I think that I'm going to take that away from this movie and continue to walk with it, which is cool. So I think I'm going to give it a 10 for lasting impression. I think that
Yeah.
the details and the plot points probably won't really like stick to me that much. I will definitely remember it as like a well crafted film. But emotionally, that's definitely what I'm going to take away the most. So I feel good with 10.
Mhm.
That's feel
Yeah,
good.
and to your point of just, like, having your actions justified, like, even just, like, going through the movie and watching Nadir, like, when we get to, like, that final argument between him and Samin where they're talking about the blood money, where, like, it even wasn't just about, like, the action, like, he now is dead set, like, even going forth of just, like, not even paying the money to make sure that this guy leaves Tamara alone at school,
Mhm.
that no, he just wants to prove that he didn't do it, no matter what it costs, no matter what. Like,
Everyone thinks that they're acting in their own best
yeah,
interest.
and again, he thinks that he is in the right constantly, because he's in that mindset, like you mentioned, throughout the entirety of the movie. So that was a very nice point.
Why, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So moving on to the visual appeal and the auditory appeal. Um, this movie does lack any memorable audio, I would say. I don't think there was there much music throughout this film at all?
I was literally like, while I was watching the movie, I'm like, there's literally no music in this movie
Which
until the end credits,
right,
pretty much.
which I actually like that.
Yeah,
Like,
because
I respect it. It
it
keeps it
keeps you
real.
in
So, like,
there.
I'm not really gonna knock it for not having, like, a memorable score because it wouldn't have fit the movie. Like, this movie is not the type of movie that has some it's not Lawrence of Arabia, right? It doesn't need this
No.
epic soundtrack. So, I actually like the choices that they made there. I really like the visual style of the film.
Yeah.
The way that there's some really long shots, lingering shots. For example, in the end, where she's about to swear on the Quran, and we just sit on that frame for like, I mean, it had to be like 2 or 3 minutes where we're just kind of watching it there, which is not crazy, but still is nice. But all that being said, I'm gonna give it a 7 because I really liked it for what it was. But it didn't there weren't any shots or anything where I was like, "Oh, like that's so visually appealing." And I
Yeah.
get that that's not what it's meant to be, and I can respect it. That's why I'm not giving it like a 4 or a 5 because it served its purpose. But I think 7 is a comfortable spot for something that did its job really well, even if its job didn't require that much, grand scenery or grand visuals or audio.
And
That was long-winded. I'm sorry.
It's okay because I 100% agree.
Oh,
I
wow.
also gave it a 7.
We're pretty in
much for
tune with these. Yeah.
Yeah. To your point, even just trying to find like pictures for a thumbnail for this video. Because
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you've been tuning in, I usually get like 3 like pretty iconic shots like from each movie that we watch. This movie, there doesn't really have that. Like every picture I find is literally just the cover where it's like Simin in front and Nadir in the back. Like that's pretty much almost every picture of this movie that you find. So again, like that kind of lines up with that. It's not trying to go for like the shot. It's not going for like something that's going to be like eye candy, like we got a plentiful amount of in Lawrence of Arabia.
Right.
But
such different movies back to back, by the way.
Absolutely.
I love it. I love it.
It is pretty crazy that like we got such a visual spectacle in Lawrence of Arabia, but then we get this very grounded, which I mean, Lawrence of Arabia, obviously based on a true story, but obviously it's portrayed in this spectacle in this epic. But then this is just a story of a family, and it's probably the most real thing I've watched, and that's in part to the visuals that the director chooses to use, like that handheld style or the lack of music to just keep you focused. Because I mean, obviously, like you are saturated in music almost all the time on your phone, you have headphones in or whatever, but for predominantly like people live life without music around them. So having the movie kind of save music for the very end just to kind of let you know that like, hey, the movie is over and this is also a movie, was a very good choice to make, and it only benefited the movie further. And so also for that reason, like I gave it a 7 because while it's not visually and auditorily like pleasing, like eye candy wise, it uses its shot selection very well.
Yeah, it still does it. It gets the job done very effectively. So I'm interested to see what you had on pacing here. Because you had mentioned the first 20 minutes being a little bit difficult.
Yeah, so pacing, that's where I gave it an 8 out of 10. Just because again, like if we would have just been basing this just off of like that first 20 minutes of the movie, I would have been like, this movie is moving so slow. But then when it picks up and it's almost like, it's weird to kind of think of it like, did you ever watch Loki?
No.
Okay. So for those of you that have, there's like a definitive timeline. Like there's just a straight line of time. And that's what I think at the beginning of this movie is. But then there's a point in the show where you start getting branches off of the timeline, like going in all sorts of different directions.
Yeah.
And that's what I think this movie starts to become I would say right when we see the father escape the house for the first time, because that's where everything sort of starts off. Or even if you even want to say that, like when Simon paid the movers for the first time, like that was like the pivotal moment that branched off all of these events in the movie. So where, yes, while the beginning may have been slow at first watch and you're just kind of thinking like, I don't know what's going on, like I did, when you think about it later on, that like those little things branched off into such bigger things later on, it helps drive the pacing forward a lot. Well, what did you think?
Yeah, I gave it an 8. I also think
let's go.
I think that there were just a couple of moments where I was like not fully in it. That's all. But for the most part, it keeps itself going in a good manner, and it reveals information in appropriate parts, like enough to keep you engaged so that you are slowly being fed information that continues to make the story gradually more interesting.
I'm interested to see where you weren't in it in the movie, because obviously I said of like the first 20 minutes I was kind of in and out of the movie,
It
but
would honestly just be it would just be passing moments, and I think because it's moving so quickly, like, I would just zone out for a second and have to rewind and kinda not I wasn't really following, but there were also moments where I guess it didn't really drag, I just was kind of brought out of it and not, like, fully engaged. So, I would say a lot of the courtroom stuff was entertaining at first, but I think that there was maybe a bit much of it. I'm
Mhm.
not sure. I mean, we should mention that there's really like what 4 settings in this entire movie.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like we don't go a lot of different places, which
It's
is
like
fine. Which is fine.
Simmons' parents' house, the apartment, the courthouse, and the school.
Yeah, I would say mostly that the knocks I'm giving it felt a little repetitive at times. I would say like
Yeah.
I felt like certain aspects of the movie were going in a little bit of a circle, but obviously not to the degree for me to give it anything lower than an 8. For the most part, I still thought that it kept its pace very well.
Going back, the part that I'm always excited to hear Parker talk about is acting. Especially in this movie, I'm very interested to see what you give it.
So I always have a hard time judging other people's acting because I'm not one to talk because I understand that it's fucking difficult and like it's not always going to come off realistic. Like there's definitely times where I watch myself and I'm like, dude, like get better at this. So it's always a difficult thing and I never try to be disparaging. I don't think there was any bad acting in this film,
I
but
don't think so either.
I definitely think that there were moments where the acting did bring me out of it. So, namely, I think that the caregiver's husband in certain moments
Yeah.
and his frustration was a bit much and also just flailing. Like the anger didn't seem it seemed like he was angry just for the sake of being angry. Like I didn't really feel like
Like
the
there was an emotional connection to
right.
his anger. Yeah.
And then also, I think there were some moments where the girl playing Simon, and I apologize, we haven't mentioned any of the actors' names throughout this entire episode. I just realized, but I thought that there were some moments where she wasn't totally realistic.
She was very like just like the I
There
feel
was a
like
moment she
the
was
only
driving a
real
car, and she you could tell she was intending to be in deep thought, and it looks like she was attempting to look like she was attempting to be in deep thought. I
yeah,
don't know
there,
how much that makes sense, but
she
it
was
looks like
pretending
someone
to
acting. In that moment, it looks like it was someone acting. But all that to say, I still give it a 7, because I think that there were some really good moments in this film. Simon did have some really great moments. I think that what's the name of the girl that played Terme
Serena Farhadi,
and the gentleman that played Nader were both great.
Payman Moadi.
Yeah, so they were both great throughout the whole film. And even the actors that I had mentioned, I had a little bit of a hang up with. I still think, on the whole, did a good job in the film. So
Yeah,
the actors did a good job of keeping it realistic, definitely. And for the most part, I felt like I was watching real people. So
yeah, and that's where we have to break the streak this time. Because I did give it an 8 out of 10. To the
I was
point.
curious if you were going to go higher or lower there.
So to your point that we made in the last episode, or I think I had talked about this a little bit, but that I feel like giving the score of acting, I feel like it has to do with the entire cast of characters. That like there's not a point where you see someone on screen watching this movie that you don't feel an emotional connection to that character, or you don't feel that like they're breaking out of the format of this movie. Like
Mhm.
to your point, like the caretaker's husband, like him flailing around, it was almost comical. Like when he I think he headbutts Samin too, like because she ends up like having a black eye.
Yep, yep.
Like I couldn't help but just laughing because he's just like there, it's not like it's like a gradual escalation to a fight. Like he's just kind of like talking normally to Nadir, and then all of a sudden he just starts throwing hands. Like
Yeah.
it's just like a whoa, okay, like what's
It's
going
a
on?
bit
And
Nick Cage and long legs.
Hear me now. Yeah, that would have honestly made his performance even better in that movie, to be honest. Because you couldn't really, you wanted to root for him like when you first met him because like he wants to help, like
Who are
he
you talking about?
the caretaker's husband.
Oh, okay.
Because they meet up at some point because the
Sure.
caretaker's like, hey, my husband doesn't have a job. Like maybe he can take better care of your dad. And like that's probably the most human part that he has in the entire movie because then after that he just becomes, like you said, like a Nick Cage level, like crazy character.
Yeah.
But going into that, despite you know, the caretaker's husband's antics, those were probably the only bits of the movie that I was ever taken out of disbelief of what was going on. Everybody else kind of made it better, so I gave that a 9 out of 10. Only because again, there weren't a lot of moments where I was like, I am not in this movie right now. Like it kept itself pretty locked into what it was trying to do and didn't really break a lot of the rules that it was setting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I would say I wanted to give it an 8 in suspension of disbelief because, as I mentioned, there were some moments in the beginning of the film where I'm like, how can you be like for example, the daughter playing with the oxygen, like
Oh my god.
could have killed the man. You know, so there were some moments where I grew frustrated with
And the facial expressions that his dad is making, like it's just traumatizing because he's obviously like this man is fighting for his life and this
right.
girl is just messing around with the oxygen and he's just
Right. So there were some moments where I was frustrated, but then, you know, I have to stop and think like there are tons of careless people in this world. Like a lot of people do act like that. Like, so I'm not going to knock it for that. I also give it a 9. I think it's actually close to being a 10 in my eyes. I think there are a couple of things
Mhm.
where that are keeping me from doing that. If we could, I'd give it a 9, probably a 9.5 actually, because when you really stop and think about it, like there are very few movies that do as good of a job as this movie does in making you feel like you're not watching a movie. Like you actually feel like you're kind of just a fly on the wall in the actual lives of these people. So that's a really difficult thing to accomplish, and the movie does it really well, especially for you know, I think actually the low budget that it had helped to achieve that goal, actually.
Yeah,
So
because they spent the money where they needed to. They had strong performances minus like again, I think the caretaker's husband is what took me away from giving it a 10 out of 10. But again, a lot of the other people like they didn't have to make like a lot of special effects for this movie. They didn't have to go like big budget like all like I feel like a lot of these scenes were almost shot like guerrilla because a lot of like the environment it just feels like you're literally just filming somebody walking around in Iran.
yeah. So
But
for originality, so this is a tough movie to rank, man. I can't lie.
yeah,
I give it an. Hmm.
I give it a
I Yeah, I think I'm gonna stick with it. I give it a 9, because it is an original
okay.
screenplay, and it's an excellent one at that. Uh, I think that yeah, I'm comfortable with that because it tells an original story that's so grounded in reality, that the fact that it is something that could feasibly happen, like in a backwards way, is making me want to deduct a point from originality, because there's nothing that's so crazy or so like profoundly original. But obviously, the movie is based in reality, so again, it achieves that goal. But yeah, it was nominated for best original screenplay. It has a great screenplay. I don't know. I might
No.
knock it down to an 8. I want to hear what you think. I might knock it down to an 8 still.
So I'm gonna go ahead and give my score
Uh huh.
because we have been in line pretty steadily.
Yeah.
And what I gave it a 9 for is because yes, that this is something that I also connected with Marriage Story as well. Was and I mean, if this gets a little deeper than it needs to, I mean, when I watched A Marriage Story, my family was going through almost the same thing. So it was very just connected in that. And so this is something that feels real to me in attaching like that, because I had that moment of like, I think that so and so parent is never wrong. Like, this is what's going on. But then as you start to kind of put the pieces together, like, you start to realize that, like, this person that I'm idolizing has their faults.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I think that in this aspect of the movie, in that the story, well, yes, it's based in reality and it has its things of what's going on. It's told in an original way, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, I feel comfortable with that because it is like in a way a divorce film, but it's completely unlike any like it. There are comparisons to be drawn with Marriage Story, but this film is not at all like Marriage Story,
No, it's
right?
not.
Like they're completely different. But obviously there's there's a divorce parallel that's going on, and it's an intimate film, so there's going to be those obvious connections. But
Mhm.
okay, I feel comfortable with the 9 at originality, but similar to how my 9 for suspension of disbelief was closer to a 10, this one is much closer to an 8.
Yeah.
Obviously, that won't matter, but we'll leave it at a 9. But yeah, go ahead with your personal attachment.
So with my personal attachment, I gave it a 2 out of 5, where, like, this movie, obviously I'm still kind of munching on it because we just watched it, but I don't think it's going to be something that's going to stick with me later on down the line, like you mentioned earlier. Like, yes, it was cool to watch it in the moment, but it's not going to be something where I'm like, hey, I know we're at a party, you want to put on a Separation?
Right. Yeah. So I when I made these rankings, I put personal attachment in as out of 5 points as the last category to kind of give me like a little bit of subjectivity to just be like, okay, do I want this film to be a 3.5-star movie on my Letterboxd, or do I want it to be a 4-star movie?
Fair.
Because, and obviously to rank how personally attached I felt to the movie, but in a way, like the two are kind of one and the same, right? I think this is a 4-star movie, so it needs to get over a 74. And I did feel personally attached to this movie for similar reasons to what you mentioned with a Marriage Story. Like, obviously, when you have witnessed, obviously, I did not witness the events of this movie unfold in my own personal life, but everyone can draw parallels, especially if you like have divorced parents and you watch a movie about a divorce. Like, it's going to hit home a little bit closer. So I think the movie did a really good job of displaying empathy and allowing you to be empathetic for characters that are flawed. So I carry a good amount away from this film, not enough to bump it up to 4 or 5 levels, but feel really good putting it right in the middle out of 3, which would put it at a 75 and a 4-star movie, which I think this movie is.
And it gives us a 75.5.
Wow, that's the most lockstep we've been in our rankings.
We have been.
So,
So it puts it literally right in the middle.
So how do you feel about that? Do you think I personally I would swap, I'd bring Lawrence of Arabia to 3rd, put this at 2nd, Fanny and Alexander 1st. But obviously that's why we're both on the podcast. I love the fact.
That's fair. I was like, I mean, I still enjoyed watching Lawrence of Arabia a lot more than
Would you
this
say
movie.
Is Lawrence of Arabia still sticking as your personal favorite, I guess is what I'm asking.
Oh, absolutely it is.
All right. Well,
there's nothing like it.
Let's see if the next movie, could have a shot. I think it's time.
I think it's the best time
to
honestly, do so.
The farther we get into the episode, the more fun the episode gets. Let's be honest.
Absolutely. So we're here. We're at the best part of the episode. All right. We're putting up a separation. We're separating from a separation. And we are going to get to it. Are you ready, Parker? Let's do it. There's no sound. It's okay. I'll edit that in. It's okay. All right. So what are we looking at?
What is this?
High and Low.
What did you have that reaction for?
Because the next movie was Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, really? Dang, this is the number 6 movie?
Another foreign film.
That's all right. That's all right.
All right. So, it's a Kurosawa film. High and Low from Akira Kurosawa, director of Yojimbo and Sanjuro, comes a tense, taut film of a modern perfect crime with more excitement than even Hitchcock could create.
Oh, shots fired.
In the midst of an attempt to take over his company, a powerhouse executive is hit with a huge ransom demand when his servant's son is kidnapped. This is exciting.
All right, yeah, I'm with it.
And this is my first Kurosawa film too, so this is going to be interesting. There's a lot of his movies on this list.
All right, so is this the first film that's inside the top 10 that we're going to be watching?
I think so, yeah.
Yep.
This is it. We're getting into the big boys now.
Very nice. All right, so let's see. By the next episode, I think we'll have an idea. You know, if this film isn't number one, then the Letterboxd doesn't know what the fuck it's talking about. So
Or the community doesn't at this point.
Yeah, right.
But I think that is where we'll end it for today. Parker, as always, it's such a pleasure. Where can people find you?
Yes, it's so much fun hopping on here and talking about new movies every week. So thanks as always for having me here.
Absolutely.
But yes, we are getting into spooky season, of course. We did just drop a brand spanking new episode today. Well, today, as of this recording of Spooky Senders. So when you're listening to this, because this episode is going to come out after recording, go ahead and check it out. Listen to some of the old episodes of Spooky Senders as well if you're a big Halloween fan. And otherwise, you can find me on Letterboxd at Parker_Paget.
And please do go watch Spooky Senders. I love listening to that back catalog. They do some pretty intense research into houses and all of that. And if you're a big HHN fan like I am,
yep,
you should check it out.
Farm too, if you're over on the West Coast and want to give it a listen. So
correct. You can find me on Letterboxd at ETZIO911. You can also follow the LetterBros Pod Letterboxd account. You can also follow us on Instagram, and you can also listen to this as the audio format on wherever you get your podcasts from. But until next time, we will see you at the movies. You gotta say goodbye, Parker, for the audio. They're not gonna see that.
Till next time.